All right, welcome back to another segment of Awake the Iron. I'm your host, Kason Pratt. And you'll notice I do not have my co-pilot with me today. CJ the Lion of Los Santiesville is not able to be here, but so I'll be flying without a wingman. So CJ does a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, the graphic stuff. So it could be a little bit of a train wreck on that, but we'll see how it goes. But we have a great guest today. We're going to be talking about red light, blue light, and red light therapy. And I got these blue light blocker glasses. They give these out to kids in school and say, "Oh, it help your eyes," and so maybe there's something to it. I don't know. We'll see how much or how little we can learn about it. It'll be a lot if David has anything to say about it.
Well, hello.
David, how are ya?
I'm good, Kason. How are you?
I'm excellent. So, and you're in your red light there. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I thought about setting up a ring light here to give myself a little more white light, but I ran out of time.
No, it looks fine. It'll be great for what we're doing.
It adds the ambiance.
Yeah. So,
Kason, I have a Canva presentation that I would love to put up at some point and kind of walk through.
Okay. Not a problem.
And so we can do that at any time.
It's not a problem.
Oh, look, present.
Oh. So now,
just like magic. All right, there we go.
There we go.
All right, and I can switch sides even. Well, that's that's kind of a jerry-rigged way to do it, but it'll work. All right. I'll figure out a better way to present through StreamYard in the future. Okay, so let's talk about light.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I've always, Kason, kind of had this, I don't know, thing for light my whole life. I've been attracted to the notion that it was more than what we thought, whether it was provocative statements from various different belief systems, like spiritual traditions, religions. And I've just always been very fascinated with it. And then I would say about 6 months ago, I ran into a neurosurgeon named Jack Kruse, Dr. Jack Kruse. And what I discovered through him is all these suspicions that I had about light all my life. My goodness, not only are they true, but light does so much more than I could have ever imagined. And so anyway, let's take a walk down this path. I guess the first thing here is that I wanted to say is my name is Dave Carlisle. David, either works great. My background is in IT. I have no medical background whatsoever. And I guess it's really kind of odd. When I wrote this out, it felt kind of odd to write this, but strong biohacking interest. And that felt kind of weird, but when I look around my house, it's evident everywhere. So
biohacking. I like that term. We're going to coin that term.
It's the notion of like optimizing abundantly good health and like not needing, hopefully ever, an allopathic medical practitioner.
Right. And you and I talk frequently, actually, and we always talk about self-experimentation, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that falls under that, and so this is part of your journey about this topic, this red light, blue light, talking about light, right?
And it must be something that why I'm so keenly interested. It's not like I've been doing this for a long time or having an interest in such things for a very long time, and it's not like myself or anyone else around me was someone I was trying to heal. That wasn't it at all. I was just, very interested. And now with my mom at 92, I do have more of a reason, to pursue some of these things because I do have somebody that I'm trying to help. But that wasn't the case for a very long time. And so I guess then the last thing on this slide that's very important is nothing that I say should be taken as medical advice. My goodness.
Right.
I have no medical background whatsoever. So anyway, moving right along. What?
For me, that's a plus.
Yeah, well, for people like us, oh gosh, what do you say about that? I'm reminded of my one of my favorite statements I've told people for decades, even back in the 80s. I used to tell people things like allopathic medicine has one goal and one goal only, and that is to turn every human body into multiple, unending sources of revenue for Big Pharma. And that's it.
Okay. So just most of our listeners slash viewers are pretty aware of a lot of things, but just for the sake of someone who might be catching this and not understanding the terms, what is allopathic medicine?
Yeah, thank you. Certainly. So, allopathic medicine is the school of medicine that our medical doctors in the Western world, and by Western world, let's just say the US for now, because Europe's a little different. There's a lot more naturopaths there and stuff. But in America, if you go to a traditional medical school where you will become an MD, you are going to an allopathic school of medicine.
Okay.
Excellent. How's that?
That's a great explanation. Yeah.
And I know that sounds a bit harsh, but I've kind of had that perspective for a long time. And I think where it started was I was exposed to a company that was selling like health and nutrition products. And I saw people who were older and in poor health and had, a variety of ailments and were taking maybe a plethora of pharmaceuticals. And some of those people, when they would get on some of these different nutritional products, they would get better. And not only would they get better, but in time, maybe they wouldn't even need, their pharmaceuticals. And so that's kind of where I first began to maybe get that interest in biohacking and headed down the path, which eventually now has led to, I think, what is the greatest discovery I've ever made, which is what light really is and what it really does
All right.
in relation to the human body. And so these slides I put together, these first few here, I got to tell you, are responses from ChatGPT to questions that I posed. And I read through them. I think they're pretty good. So let's start with this for a history, and we'll kind of start with ancient beginning and work our way up to modern times. Okay.
Excellent.
So as far back as 1500 BCE, we've got the Egyptians and Indians using sunlight to treat various ailments, including skin conditions. In India, and Atharva Veda described as using sunlight in combination with plant extracts for therapeutic purposes. So this is 1500 BCE. And then if we move forward to Hippocrates, or as I like to say, Hippocrates, which I think come from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, maybe. I'm not sure.
Socrates, man. Socrates.
Right? Isn't that where that's from? Oh my gosh.
De los Socrates. Socrates. Hey, we know that name. Yeah. Hey, look him up. Oh, it's under Socrates. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, wrong. Ever since the movie, and because it's stuck in my head that way.
You always say Hippocrates. Yeah, Hippocrates.
Yeah. Hippocrates. All right. So 460 to 370 BCE is his era, and he was known as the father of medicine, and he recommended sunlight for treating various diseases, including lethargy and wounds. And then moving forward again to say 200 to 1200 CE, we've got Roman physicians using sunlight for healing purposes. We've got Islamic scholars such as Avicenna.
Okay,
we'll Avicenna also emphasized the benefits of sunlight in medical treatment. So this is all long time ago.
Right. So real quick, I got to pause you there because at the very top there, it said they used sunlight to treat certain ailments.
Yes.
And today we're told that the sun exposure is bad, right?
Yes.
I mean, maybe not totally, but don't stay on the sun too long.
Oh, right? No. Well, I would say I keep forgetting I'm on camera here and looking off all over the place. I would say one, I don't want to say color. It's one, say band of frequencies in particular, and that's ultraviolet, UVA, UVB, and then there's UVC, but it's attenuated by the atmosphere to the point that we really don't get any. But dermatology, ophthalmology, and oncology all demonize and vilify UV light and tell people to avoid it, right? They tell you to cover your skin. They tell you to slather yourself with sunscreen and not allow it to, get to your skin. And, I might be getting a bit ahead of myself here, but I'd say that the doctor, I think, that might be the biggest genius in the world regarding this topic, Jack Kruse, he says that he thinks that sunscreen is the biggest gateway drug to big pharma that exists. And I know for a lot of people that sounds crazy, because you could not imagine that light could ever be that. I mean, it's just light, right?
Yeah. Very interesting.
But as we'll see here as we go forward, that is not true. Light is not just for the purpose of illumination.
Okay.
All right, so moving right along here, the next slide, 19th century, we've got Niels Finsen here, and he's a Danish physician who often credited as the founder of modern light therapy. In the 1890s, he developed the Finsen lamp, which emitted UV light. He successfully treated patients with lupus vulgaris, a skin form of tuberculosis, and other conditions. Finsen was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1903 for his pioneering work. And so here we've got a guy in 1903 winning a Nobel Prize for healing people with light, and not just light, UV light, which is what is so vilified.
Wow, interesting. Okay.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting that there would be, successful treatments, and then today, right? It's considered bad. Actually, a lot of people probably haven't even heard of light therapy as a treatment. So something happened in the last 120 years where it's been forgotten or suppressed or swept under the rug, or maybe they quote unquote came out with something better. That's in big quotes.
It's so hard to say. I think part of it is the evolution of our lifestyle in what we would consider to be first world countries, and how, as our societies have evolved, it's brought us indoors, and where we're just not getting exposure to full spectrum sunlight. And I think that occurred long before the vilification of UV light and the advent of like chemical sunscreens, and the encouragement to slather our bodies in them. But at some point, the vilification of UV light and the recommendation to avoid it and to put sunscreen on, all that, those recommendations are counterproductive. And they were made by the establishments that alleged to be those working for our benefit.
Yeah, well stated. Okay.
So I don't know. Okay, so anyway, on here next, we've got the development of phototherapy, the discovery of biological effects of specific wavelengths, including UV light's ability to kill bacteria, led to increased interest in therapeutic light use. And so that's, again, around the turn of the century, between, from 1800s to 1900s. Sunlight exposure was used in sanatoria to treat tuberculosis before antibiotics became widespread. That's interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah. Well, as far as we get farther down the line here, one of the doctors that I have at the end of the slides here to recommend for people to go out and research, he is like an ICU physician. And at some point, he became aware of the notion that light could be a powerful healing agent. And he started putting his ICU patients out in the sun. And to the great surprise of the hospital staff, his outcomes became radically different than his colleagues.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some really neat podcasts where that doctor talks about that. So I'll be sure and point him out when we get to the end here.
Yeah.
All right, now we've got 20th century advancements. Seasonal affective disorder in the 1980s, research by Norman E. Rosenthal and colleagues at the National Institute of Mental Health established light therapy as an effective treatment for seasonal affective disorder. Bright light therapy became a standard approach for improving mood and regulating circadian rhythms.
So what is seasonal affective disorder? Is it just I'm sad because it's February and I live in Ohio and it sucks?
Well, yeah, you could definitely put it that way, and that wouldn't be an inappropriate description because then it does kind of describe it. I've witnessed it, I think, more than some people because not in that I've experienced it personally, but seen it in others because I lived in Seattle for so long. And, there's times there are years and seasons where I don't think I would see the sun for maybe 90 days, and,
Oh, wow.
and some days the cloud cover is so thick that you cannot tell where in the sky the sun is. There's no like hot spot that you can see.
Mm-hmm.
None at all. And a lot of people that I encountered there that moved to Seattle from another area, especially an area with significantly more sunlight, a lot of those people could not endure the winter season in Seattle.
No, just like psychologically or like mentally?
Yeah, it would affect their mood, their psychological well-being. They were depressed maybe, or, it just was something that was difficult for them. And other people didn't seem to have much problem or any problem with that. But I did meet people that would move to Seattle, and because I was in IT and software development, they'd come up there for a job, maybe at Microsoft or some other software developer, and spend one winter, and then they're out. They're back to Florida, wherever they came from.
Right.
And that would be the reason they cited why, is they just couldn't stand the seasons, the weather in Seattle.
Well, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And then we have in the 20th century of medical applications. Neonatal jaundice. In the 1950s, researchers discovered that blue light could reduce
bilirubin, yeah, and babies.
Yeah, bilirubin, thank you. Levels in newborns, leading to widespread use of phototherapy in hospitals. Psoriasis and skin conditions. UV light therapy became a common treatment for psoriasis, eczema, and vitiligo. Right? I think that's right. And Jack Kruse, again, talking about the neurosurgeon, Jack Kruse, he talks about patients that he has had with vitiligo and how he's able to treat them completely with light and reverse it. Advances in technology. Introduction to LED light therapy in the late 20th century allowed for safer and more precise applications. Red and near-infrared light therapy gained popularity for tissue healing, anti-aging, and pain management. And so that's, one of the reasons now that this is becoming so popular is the whole advent of LED lights that output the frequencies of light that are desired for this form of therapy in a cost-effective fashion. And those haven't been around all that long. And before that, they were using lasers to generate light in specific wavelengths for therapy purposes. But for an at-home application, I think LEDs are better in that they're safer. With lasers, you got to be careful with intensity and things like that in ways that I don't think you really have to with LEDs.
Okay.
And then present day light therapy. Light therapy is now a well-established medical treatment with diverse applications, including mental health, bright light therapy for seasonal affective disorder and depression, dermatology, treatment for acne, psoriasis, and vitiligo, chronic pain and wound healing, which are red and near infrared light frequencies, sleep disorders, circadian rhythm regulation using blue or white light. And red light also has a big effect on circadian cycles as
And
well.
what is circadian rhythms? We hear that.
So, I kind of view the circadian cycle as the body being in sync with nature. And so what happens is our body gets signals from light that tells us what time of day it is. And by knowing that, then the body knows what kind of like processes to run. If it's daytime and you're going to be, going about your day, you want to be awake and alert, right? And so when you go outside a couple of hours after sunrise, and UV light becomes present, I think that's something maybe we should digress a bit. When the sun first rises, it's mostly red and infrared that hits the body, which is really therapeutic and powerful in the early morning. And then a couple of hours later, you get the rise of UV, and ultraviolet then starts to get to the Earth's surface and would, touch us, strike our skin if we were outside and exposed. And so all of that different light, as it changes, affects the human body. And so if you're getting lots of UV or in particular blue light in the visible spectrum during the day, that can be really bad for us. And we get a lot of that because we expose ourselves to our devices. All of our devices, such as our computer monitors and our phones, are all blue lit devices. They output a big spike in blue light frequency. And while that doesn't sound like it should have any effect on us at all, it does. And it's very toxic to have that light frequency go, into the eyes after sunset, because it tells your body it's still daytime. And all those processes that run are still triggered to be on.
Okay, interesting. So
I'm sorry, kind of all over there.
no, that's really interesting. So let me ask you this: that you said our electronic devices, like our screens, computers, phones, they emit blue light. Is that a calculated decision, or is that a just the nature of the device itself, or can these devices emit light in a little bit different part of the spectrum? I don't know. I'm just trying to think.
That's a great question, and I'm not sure I can really answer that. What I can say for sure, and I know this probably adds to more of the conspiratorial notion of that whole scenario, is the patents for blue light backlit displays were originally awarded to DARPA, right?
That's the research and development branch of the government.
Yep, exactly. And so those patents were originally with DARPA, and at some point they moved those patents from DARPA to two entities, really, Google and Meta, who now own and hold those patents for the blue light display technology. And if you ask someone like Dr. Jack Kruse, he will say, I believe, that it's absolutely by design. And he talks at great length as to where DARPA got the notion to even create those patents in the first place. And that's a very long story, probably out of scope for today, but something that we could definitely provide a link to in the show notes, where Dr. Kruse himself takes people down that path of where all of this technology came from and who had control of it, who has control of it now, and what it was meant to do, according to him, beyond just provide us with displays that we could got color accurate displays to look at, right? If you listen to Jack's narrative, that blue light is part of the overarching agenda used to dumb down humanity in a way where they can be more easily manipulated and controlled by things like a weaponized propaganda outlet, such as our large network news outlets. And I know that's a deep rabbit hole to just jump down spontaneously here, but if that sort of thing is interesting to you, go find Jack Kruse and listen to his more recent podcasts that he's done in the last year.
Okay, absolutely. And yeah, like you said, we'll have some links in the show notes. People can chase down these things. And I had to ask, sorry.
Taking me down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. I had to ask, but and like we say on this show a lot, you don't have to believe what we're saying. But it's more like doors, show you some doors and you can go look and decide for yourself. And some things are not known, but all this stuff it's worth looking into. And I feel like every show we do, we want to present something it's worth checking out. And maybe it sounds crazy, but so this there's an ER doctor, right, or an ICU doctor that takes his patients outside to get sunlight. That sounds dumb, right? You treat them inside with medicine and stuff. Well, maybe not. So
wait, it's not. It's way worse than that. Not only do we treat them inside, but we treat them inside under bright blue lights that are either fluorescent or LED. Right? We treat them inside under artificial light that emits a spectra of light that physically harms our bodies. Wow, so not only do we deprive them of the frequencies of light that can heal them, but we expose them to what harms them.
So what do you think about like these glasses, these blue light blocking glasses that the eye doctor told my daughter when she was in high school, hey, your eyes are really irritated a lot and you're staring at screens, you might benefit from these. What are these kind of things? What are they doing? They filtering that blue or something?
Yeah, so that's an interesting topic too. And again, I would defer to people with far more expertise than I am on this topic. And Jack is a perfect one. Jack Kruse, the neurosurgeon. He wears blue blockers everywhere. If he's not outside in natural light, he's got them on pretty much.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And again, and when it's particularly critical to wear them, as far as maintaining good health, would be after sunset, right? And before sunrise. When there is no sun, that's when you, more than any time, do not want to expose yourself to blue light. So wearing blue blocking glasses, using applications on, on your computers and phones. Most operating systems have a built-in little app where you can attenuate the blue light. Some call it like night light or night shift. And then you can get third-party apps. I think there's one called Flux that is, F.lux, and that one is a third-party app that you can use to do that too. But avoiding blue light after sunset is very important, more important than people realize. And I think if you study the work of the doctors that we'll talk about later here and name and help you find, you will understand much better from hearing, that from them, who are the type of scientific professionals that really know what they're doing with this stuff.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah. This year I put this slide in just to kind of show people, because I think most people don't study physics and light, really. That's not the kind of thing that is a part of most people's world. And so here's a part of the electromagnetic spectrum here, and it shows from AM radio up to gamma rays. the different frequencies. And then you've got that little gap there in the center, which is our visible light spectrum. And so we're positioned there right between radar and X-ray is the light spectra. And another thing that's really interesting that might be good to talk about at this point is we have visible light and we have non-visible light, right? That comes from the sun. And visible light's kind of what we're looking at here with the colored, imagery with the wavelength. But on the red end, farther than the visual limit, we have infrared. And on the end, on the blue end down there, on the left side, we've got ultraviolet light. And all of those frequencies of light are not detectable by the human eye. And one of the things I've heard Jack Kruse say that's really kind of interesting is it's almost like we were given vision within a certain spectra, and we don't see the two ends of the spectra, which are those that have the most profound effect on our health. And maybe that's by design so that we're not inclined to mess around with them. We just let that be. We're unaware of it. And that, because both ends of the spectrum in infrared and UV have incredibly powerful healing effects. And you should also be stated that UV also is what burns the skin, right? It's what causes sunburn. And so being reckless outside in the sun and getting a sunburn isn't good. That's overexposure to UV. But I now believe, because of my exposure to these different doctors, that a certain amount of exposure to UV is necessary for proper human functioning. Another topic that I think is really important is that Jack Kruse talks about a lot is the notion of developing one's solar callus. And so you go out in the sun and you slowly and incrementally increase the amount of time that you expose yourself to the sun until you no longer easily burn. And then at that point, you'll be able to be out in the sun comfortably long enough to get the physiological effect to optimize your health without burning your skin and causing damage. But don't want to be reckless and do it really, go out like,
right.
You live in Seattle all year and then you fly to Hawaii in July or something and spend 2 days in the sun.
I think of spring break, people go on spring break. They live in Ohio, which is actually a really, really cloudy region and low sun angle in the winter. So, we got people on spring break, woohoo, they go down to Florida and they get absolutely scorched. I mean, they're like as red as you look right now, but just from the sunburn. Yeah. So, I guess you called it solar callus. I don't know. Is that something that's maybe difficult for people to do when you live in more northern regions, or by the time I get built up to it, if I'm doing it in the summer, then it's going to be fall and winter again, I guess, or something.
So for us, and I'm farther north, Kaysen, than you are. I'm at 47.5 degrees north, and so my solar callus is very seasonal, for sure. And I suppose that's a good segue to just mention briefly something that might be good for people to hear. It's related to light in that it is what Dr. Jack Kruse says we should all be doing if we live in northern latitudes and don't get sun exposure adequately in the winter. And he talks about cold thermogenesis, and what that is most people have heard of cold plunging, right? People that like to take cold plunges, get in cold water, maybe all the way up to the just their head sticking out, and maybe they spend 2 minutes or maybe up to 10 minutes, and the water is somewhere between just above freezing to maybe 54 degrees Fahrenheit, right in that range, right? That's the cold plunge people, and that's what they do. And so when you cold plunge, that's an example of achieving a state of cold thermal genesis. And you can also do it outside by, maybe going for a walk in the winter with your t-shirt on for a half hour or something like that, where you expose the body to cold. And the reason is, and this I know sounds wild, but again, I point you back to the neurosurgeon, Jack Kruse, and if you really want to understand this, you should listen to him. But he says that in the winter, when it's cold and we expose ourselves to the cold, our bodies generate UV light internally in our cells. And that replaces the sun and the need for UV light from the sun. It's like nature was designed such that even though we have a need for those light frequencies, in the winter, in the cold, where the light doesn't exist, nature provides a way.
That's fascinating.
It's so fascinating. And he says that, like, I think, and again, Jack, if I say this wrong, come slap me, but how much like cold exposure you need or how effective that is based on your mitochondrial DNA. And your mitochondrial DNA comes from your mother, it's your maternal side. And so, how far north your mother's mitochondrial DNA, how far north she is from, her genetics, determine what I believe is called your mitochondrial haplotype. And people from northern regions have uncoupled mitochondrial haplotypes, which makes them more efficient at utilizing sunlight and generating light, possibly in their own bodies. And people from more equatorial regions have coupled haplotype and mitochondria, and that causes them to utilize light differently because their genetics they're used to being in intense sunlight all the time. And so, they're used to getting kind of an overabundance of light, and the people in the north are getting an underabundance. And so they have this different mitochondrial haplotype. Crazy stuff. And I know I probably explain it poorly because again, I'm a computer geek, talking about this stuff, but
I thought it was fine. I mean, enough for us to, get a nugget of something to go, go look into.
If that nugget inspires anyone to go look into it, yeah, the place to go probably is Jack first. He's the one talking in particular about that narrative right there. He was the first, I believe, that I know of to talk about the notion that we generate light internally inside of ourselves. And for a long time, we would not have known that because the light we generate inside of ourselves, the number of photons is small enough that there's no way to perceive it without photomultiplier technology. And I believe a scientist named Fritz Popp in the 1950s, I believe, invented the photomultiplier, which now gives us the visibility that we need to be able to see that.
Wow, okay.
So the takeaway, the TLDR on that is build your solar callus in the spring, expose yourself to as much full spectrum sunlight as you can without sunscreen and without covering your eyes with either contacts or lenses that block UV. And that doesn't suggest that midday you stare at the sun. Just be out in the ambient light with your eyes unshielded.
Well, I actually stopped wearing sunglasses a while ago just because I had been hearing things like what you just said. And I always was really sensitive and I needed sunglasses, but I thought, you know what? I mean, I think we were made to not need sunglasses. So I just like weaned myself off of it, and I'm fine. I I'm not as
Did
sensitive
you?
anymore to it. I don't know.
Yeah, you just touched on right there the question that I wanted to ask, which was there an acclimation period?
Sure, it was relatively short, and I was surprised. I thought, oh, I'm gonna have headaches for a while, and it was literally, I think it was late spring, so we're talking lots of sunlight, bright, going to soccer games, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, so you acclimated pretty quickly. As soon as I discovered Jack Cruz and went down that rabbit hole, every time I started walking every day and spending more time. I just walk in shorts and I don't wear my glasses now. And my neighbors probably think I'm crazy because I'm like this 60-year-old man walking around in little shorts and nothing else. But I did that, from the time I discovered Jack in, I think, August, all the way through the end of the summer. And I told my 92-year-old mother to start getting out in the sun, expose as much skin as she can to the sun as she's comfortable with, and to not wear her glasses because she doesn't really need them for like outside for distant stuff as well, and so just leave them behind so you're not blocking any light frequencies. And she started sitting out in her chair in the sun, exposing her legs and her arms without her glasses on. And within 4 or 5 days, anecdotally, she's saying, I feel like I have more energy. I feel like I don't need to nap anymore like I was. And
yeah,
the effect is quick.
are you are you comfortable sharing about her eyesite? We talked about that.
Yeah, and so that's a path I would love to go down. I'm going to switch slides here real quick too.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I jumped the gun, but I
No,
found that fascinating when we talk sometimes. And
no, we will definitely yes, I will get there. Let me
okay,
meander here a little bit more, and then I'll bring it around to that, because everything I'm talking about so far is, the big differentiation here is the notion between red light therapy, which is with devices inside that are typically LED based, and sunlight. And the message that everyone should hear is that if you have sufficient sunlight, you can do everything we're going to talk about here without spending a dollar. All you have to do is get yourself in the light unprotected and build your solar callus and spend enough time out there. And because all of these frequencies we're talking about and more is included in the sun. And the devices, I think, are beneficial for people who, for whatever reason, don't have access to the sun. And for me, at 47.5 degrees north, that's all winter long. And well, we get a little sun, but it's not a sufficient level of light intensity, I don't think, to have a big metabolic biological effect. And so that's why, like at our house, we've got these red light therapy devices. And even this red light that I'm basking in now is a cheap red light therapy device off Amazon, which may or may not have therapeutic value. That's a whole nother story we could touch on later. But the point being is that if you have access to the sun, that's all you need. Nature has provided everything you need, if that's true. So this is just another slide that just picks the light spectrum that I had here, which up on the very top, it shows you the wavelengths in nanometers, the black text up top. And then it depicts, the ultraviolet, infrared, and visible spectrum, kind of lays it out there in the center. The squiggly line shows you that the wavelength is shorter as you get up into the higher frequency light of blue and ultraviolet, blue, purple, ultraviolet. And then the infrared, the longer, lazier waveform, that's because the infrared light is a lower frequency and longer wavelength of light. And then down below that, you've got just the different classifications, categories. You've got far infrared, near infrared. Let's see, how are they breaking those down? It's like, usually it's infrared A and far infrared IRC and IRB, not really sure what those are. Anyway, well, maybe it's just infrared A, B, and C, and some people call that just far infrared. I don't know. Anyway, and then on the other end of the spectrum, UV, and so you've got UVA, UVB, and UVC. And then I also find it interesting, like look at the length of the visible spectrum there. It's like from 400 nanometers to maybe 750, right? And then you've got this ultraviolet below it, starting it from like, 10, it says 10 nanometers here, but typically when I see these clinicians talking about UV light, they start talking about it at about 200 nanometers. So, but anyway, up to 400, and then from 750 to up over 1,000 nanometers of infrared. So, we've got as much non-visible light from like a frequency perspective pretty much as we do visible light. And another thing I think that's really an interesting thing that I've learned is that at sunrise and sunset, we're getting mostly infrared, red, and orange light. And then as the sun is closer to the midday, we get ultraviolet and we get the other portions of the visible spectrum in higher quantities like blue and green and those. But as far as the intensity of the sun, even at midday, when the visible portion of the spectrum and blue is at its peak and ultraviolet is at its peak, even in those moments, I believe it's 41% of the light that is emitted from the sun is red and infrared. So red and infrared is the biggest portion of light from a light intensity standpoint. And then it also turns out that red and infrared light frequencies also happen to be some of the most healing, if not the most healing end of the spectrum for the human body. And it's what we get the most of. Imagine that. Nature knew, right? Yeah. Nature, God, the creator, whatever your belief system might be, it's all laid out by design, I think.
Wow. Okay, so how are we doing? We're heading toward 1 hour.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh shoot.
We can go longer, but
it's up to you, Case, and I'm happy to.
Where are you at on your
getting close slide? To the knock my earpiece out. Getting close to the end here. And I'll
That's
pick
fine.
This up a bit.
I'd rather not. I'd rather not stop. Let's just finish it out, and we don't have to rush. Just whatever it takes, it takes. It's fine.
How about this? I'll try not to meander all over the place.
but I don't really want to restrict that. It's okay. It's all right.
It's one of the things that comes easiest to me. Restricting it might be difficult.
Well, some of our tangents are my fault because I asked the questions, so you got to address them. So
I love it. I love the tangents. All right. All right. On this slide, and I don't think it depicts it exactly the way I want, but I went out and hunted down a slide that talked about mitochondrial ATP and red light before we hopped on the call and stuck it in here. But I'd like to talk about this for a bit because everything we talked about historically in relation to light therapy didn't touch on this. And this is something that has been very, very, very scientifically proven. You can go out on PubMed and you can do a search and you can find all kinds of studies about this stuff. And the term you want to use if you were to go out and search PubMed is the one that's down toward the center bottom of this slide where it says photobiomodulation. If you're going to search on PubMed, that's the term you want to use because that's the scientific term used in journals. You'll rarely see red light therapy. And so what is this about? And so when we use a red light therapy device or get access to the sun, we're getting these infrared frequencies of light. And our therapy devices uses specific frequencies of infrared light that have been shown to do particular things. And this slide is maybe the most profound because of what it does in the cells of our body. So inside of our cells, we have an organelle that's called mitochondria. And what mitochondria does is it is the engine or the powerhouse of our cells. And so all the mitochondria inside of our cells, they do this little cycle that's called a Krebs cycle. And on the input side of the mitochondria, what drives this on the input side is electrons, which come essentially from our food and end up broken down to the point where they enter the electron transport chain and they go to the mitochondria, into the mitochondria as electrons, right, on the chain. And then you also have oxygen, which comes to the mitochondria. And those two things together allow the Krebs cycle to occur, and that spits out ATP. And ATP is the fuel that our body burns, right? It's cellular energy. And every Krebs cycle typically outputs 2 ATP. And if you introduce the presence of infrared light, it causes the mitochondria to take in more oxygen. And as a result, every Krebs cycle outputs 38 ATP. And 36, or is it 36 or 38? It's 36 or 38. One of those two. I might have had that wrong. It might be 36.
That's all right.
But, you know,
magnitudes more is what it is.
Oh my goodness. You know, you think about increasing ATP production, which, by the way, for those that might be listening, ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. And it is the energy that our bodies burn. And to think about, you can introduce a frequency of light that happens to be not visible to the human eye, although you feel it as warmth. But by introducing that frequency of light, you're causing every mitochondria to produce exponentially more ATP. It's just unreal. And it also, when that process occurs, it also causes the release of what they call mitochondrial nitric oxide. And so increasing mitochondrial nitric oxide is also beneficial to the cells. And so, you know, you'll hear people talk about different chronic disease conditions and how they feel that red light therapy has positively affected their health. And you know, at the end of the day, I think the thing that people need to understand is I don't necessarily think red light therapy treats any specific chronic disease condition itself. But if every mitochondria in your body is producing more ATP, your body's ability to heal itself is what increases. And the healing that occurs is your body doing what it was meant to do. It just has more fuel to do it. It's every cell of your body becomes better optimized. And so that's one of the reasons why, you know, that I decided to get our red light panels, is how profoundly it affects mitochondrial performance and function in our bodies. And another thing I think I would say that I get from some of these doctors I've listened to, and please go out, fact check the heck out of this, but some of these chronic disease conditions in our bodies, it goes by all different names, all different types of chronic diseases and autoimmune disorders too. Some of them are now starting to look like they are mitochondrially related. Mitochondrially. I wonder if that's a word. And the notion being is that if your mitochondria are sick, if they are dysfunctional, those are the energy generators of your body. And so if every cell in your body can't perform right because its energy, it doesn't have the right energy projection to do so, it might make sense that would lead to a variety of chronic disease states. And that optimizing mitochondrial performance, or returning it back to a level of performance that it was meant to be at, you know, maybe that's what really reverses a whole lot of this stuff. that plague our society. And I, like, at the end of the day, I don't know. I'm not a medical professional, but there's a whole lot of doctors out there talking about this very topic. So, what do you think of that?
Yeah, it's fascinating. That's awesome. Some of the
Yeah.
I have to remember my high school biology, so it gets kind of technical. Some of it's a little maybe over some people's heads, including mine, but I get the gist. Yeah, but my granny would say, "Well, it's good for what ails you."
Yeah, right, exactly, and me too, and it's over my head as well. And if I use some of that terminology in context, and if I understand it at a crude layman's level, it's because I have listened to countless hours of the doctors that we're going to talk about at the end. I have gone after pretty much every podcast I can find where they're talking about light, and light and healing. So, moving right along, that is my red light at home. And that's over a massage table. And it is 2 panels end to end. Each panel is 3 feet long, so it's 6 feet long and 12 inches wide. It emits 2 frequencies of visible red light and 4 frequencies of non-visible infrared light. And, all those frequencies are chosen based on research that's been done and where it's been found that wavelengths of, different wavelengths are effective for different things or whatever. And ours will also output blue. It's got, I think, 4 blue LEDs on each panel. And the blue is used to create, I think, certain dermatology conditions. And we don't use it at all. We've never even turned the blue on. And the reason is, again, because of Dr. Jack Kruse and him bringing to my awareness how toxically overexposed we are to blue light. And so the last thing I want is more blue light.
Right. So yeah, you were getting plenty of that. So we're good.
Yeah. And if I had somebody, come here that had a specific dermatology condition that could be affected by that positively, absolutely, I would let them try it. But for us, the rest of us that don't, it just doesn't make sense to me.
So what do? You just lay under it for a little while, or how do you know how much to get? Or
yeah,
I mean?
Thank you. That's the and there's that's a slide that I should add. And again, it's a bit esoteric right now, and I say that because I don't think people really know. I think even the best doctors out there that are researching this, it's still kind of unknown. I can tell you some things about dosing, and the things I can tell you, there's 2 factors in dosing. One is called irradiance, and irradiance is measured in milliwatts per centimeter squared. And you can get devices that you can buy off Amazon that will measure the irradiance of a light source. And the irradiance is directly affected by the distance from the light, right? So if you have, and that's because light is subject to the inverse square law of physics, I believe. And so the fall off of, the irradiance is really rapid as you move away. And so most light manufacturers, they will publish the irradiance at like 3, 6, 12 inches away to give you an idea of what it is. And then the other variable is time, right? So the irradiance is the intensity of the light, and then how much time you spend exposed to the light is dosing. And they measure that in joules. And the formula for joules is really easy. It's watts times seconds. And that gives you joules. And so one of the things that some people might make a mistake on is most of the panel manufacturers, they advertise their in light intensity irradiance in milliwatts per centimeter squared. And so say if it was 150 milliwatts per centimeter squared and you want to figure out joules, you've got to move the decimal points. The decimal place 3 to the left before you multiply it by the number of seconds, or you get the wrong answer. So just know that you have to convert that little formula to make that work. But that's it. And so, these different studies, I hear doctors, the bottom name on this slide right here, Dr. Glenn Jeffrey, he's in London, and I believe he is more of a researcher, not a clinician. And he has found that fairly low amount of joules can be effective. And so, as many as, I want to say, even below 10 joules, he finds effective for treating certain things. But a lot, and then you talk to other people and they'll say 50 to 100 joules is kind of the range you want to go for. And then where the water gets even muddier is, what do you want to treat? Right? If you're treating a skin condition, you don't need probably as much time in irradiance because you're treating something that's at the surface level. You're not trying to get deep into the body and treat something that's deep down inside, because the light's going to attenuate as it goes into the body. And that's another great thing to touch on, is that fits all right into that is, visible red pretty much terminates at the skin. Let's go back a couple slides here. I think I had one. Yeah, right here. It kind of shows you visible light at the epidermis, and then you've got the dermis, and then you've got the hypodermis and muscle. And so after you get out of the visible spectrum and into infrared, you'll penetrate deep into the body. And according to Dr. Jack Kruse, infrared light will go right through the skull and into the brain, which he says is a very good thing.
So for the sake of our anyone who's listening and not seeing this, I'm just going to read off these names. This is Dr. Jack Kruse. You've heard David say that name several times today. That's Kruse, and then we got Alexis Cowan. I'm going to say Cowan. Max Gulane. Is that how you say it? Yeah, Gulane.
Yeah, Gulane.
Gulhane. Roger Seholt.
Schult.
I'll spell it. Seheult and Glenn Jeffrey. Jeffrey. Yeah, this is your recommendations to check out, right? For more.
Yep. And one of the things I would say here is that I should throw out, and hold on before I do that. So the dosing thing, did I get where you wanted to get there? It's a bit convoluted, and I think the experts are unsure.
Yeah, that's fine. That's okay to not be sure.
The other thing that's important, and I think would be irresponsible if I didn't mention regarding dosing, is this. Light therapies with red and infrared, it's not something where more is better all the time. And the researchers out there, they all say that for everyone, there's an optimal dosing range. And figuring that out is important, because if you go under or over, you achieve diminishing returns. So your results actually diminish if you overexpose. And so at our house, with the panels we're using, we're doing at about 10, 12 inches off the panels. We're doing up to 20 minutes, where that's 10 minutes on each side of our body. And just for reference, we're using Platinum LED Biomax 900 panels, which are also, I think, at this time, some of the most powerful as far as the light intensity, the irradiance that come off of them. And for a lot of the panels out there, especially the stuff that on Amazon that is less expensive, less expensive typically means lower light intensity too. And so a lot of those, assuming if they are outputting the correct frequencies, you might have to get within 3 to 6 inches of it in order to achieve a therapeutic level of intensity.
Right. Okay.
And that's
So what-
I'm talking the $30, $50 panels off of Amazon,
Right.
the cheapos.
So what have you, because you're a biohacker, self biohacker, right? You experiment on yourself. And you take care of your mother. What have you seen? What kind of results have you seen?
So the biggest thing was probably the first thing. And that is my mother. She's 92. And about 10 years ago, she was told by an optometrist that she had the beginnings of macular degeneration in her left eye. And then over time, after he told her that, for folks that don't know, I think a lot of times that sort of age-related macular degeneration is a black spot in their field of vision in that eye, and it grows as it progresses. And over time, it'll take most, if not the entire field of view from that eye. And my mom's had progressed to the point where most of her left eye's field of view, she felt, was obscured by the black spot. Okay. And so we get our light set up. And one of the reasons I bought it was because I had encountered videos on YouTube from optometrists talking about how red light therapy is being used in Latin America and parts of Western Europe to treat both age-related macular degeneration and myopia. And so I'm like, if this could help my mom's eyes, that would be great. And I thought maybe, gosh, if it just helps a little bit in a few months, that'll be a win, And we're sitting, we've had the panel for 1 week. She had used it for 7 days. She's sitting at our living room table at lunch, and she looks out the window and she looks back at me and she's like, "You're not going to believe this, but I just realized that black spot in my left eye is gone."
Wow.
Yeah. I'm like, "What?
No way.
Are you kidding me?" And she's like, "No, it's gone." And at first, we thought maybe, that, it's my mom is, a lot of people that get older, they become more childlike. And so she's almost like an advanced toddler in a way. And she'd had a stroke too at some point in her past. And so cognitively, she's a little childlike. And but then I kept asking her, like, in subsequent days, every day at lunch, I'd ask her, "So where's that black spot?" And she'd like look out the window. She's like, "Dave, I can't see it." And I'd tell her, cover her right eye, and she'd cover her right eye. And I'd be like, "What can you see?" And she's like, "I can see everything."
Wow.
It's like, yeah, wow. And so we're pretty sure now that there has been a fairly drastic effect there for her. People have asked me if she has wet or dry macular degeneration, and I don't know the answer to that. I don't remember the optometrist, if he articulated that or not. And then also there's a lot of research that shows that red and infrared light therapy may help with myopia, which is nearsightedness, particularly with children, in the areas of preventing it from occurring and possibly reversing it. As for adults, I don't know. I don't think there's been much studies done for adults in myopia, so I'm not sure. The one thing I can say in relation to my vision is my night vision has improved, in particular for driving. For a number of years, when I would drive out on the periphery of my vision, it would be kind of hard to discern like the subtle changes that are occurring out there. And I always felt like my brain was trying to concentrate, extra hard, trying to do so. And I don't know, I think it was a couple months, maybe 6-8 weeks or somewhere in that range after we got that device. And I've been using it every day as well. Driving home one night, I noticed that's not happening. And everything seems really sharp and clear without that stress like it did when I was younger. And so that's still going on too, which is really cool. And then I would say that I can definitely feel what feels like an energizing effect in my body from using it. That's something else I would say. I know that's really anecdotal, and I also realize that that's something that very easily could be subject to placebo. But that has been the case. We've been doing this now over 2 months, and I still feel it after I use it, like I'm energized for a while afterward.
That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. It's my cat is obsessed with it. She will, if I leave the door open with that red light running, and if there's a human laying on that massage table, she'll get up there and try to push you out of the way to get into the center right under that light. So
Yeah.
I'll have something else I'm working on, Case, and I don't have feedback yet, is our cat is 15 years old, Siamese. She has asthma, and she takes a steroid every day that helps alleviate her asthma symptoms. And according to, these large language model AI things like ChatGPT, I haven't gone out and hunted it down myself. It's so easy to try to use those to aggregate research really quick. But according to it, there have been studies that suggest that red and near infrared light may have a positive effect on asthma. And so I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to back off the steroid that she's taken ever so slightly, start to taper it off, and see if her coughing starts to come back. Because she started using the steroid before we got the red light. And then after that, it's like, well, that cat gets 20 minutes a day under that thing. She'd be the perfect test subject.
Yeah, that. Right.
And if we could control her asthmatic symptoms with light and not have to give her that steroid, that would be a huge win, because the steroid is, that's a burden. That's processed through the liver, and that's burdensome for her elimination systems. And so we'll see, but I'm going to definitely do that at some point too.
Right. Okay.
There's so much I didn't say, and I know we're way over.
That's all right. I know how it goes. It's a everything kind of intertwines too. So like, your discussion can go almost any direction, and you got some guy like me chiming in and asking questions and then derailing the topic. And
oh no, I love that.
I do too. But so that's okay. But it's just exposure. No pun intended. Exposure to the topic for people who maybe never heard of it. That it is a real thing. Can
I say something else about the doctors here real quick before we go?
Absolutely.
All right. So when I talk about Jack Kruse, Dr. Jack Kruse, he's like, Jack says on most podcasts that he's not everyone's cup of tea. And the reason he says that is because Jack is, in my opinion, maybe the most brilliant human I have ever encountered, living human I've ever encountered. But he's also the most direct. And, some of the podcasts he does, the podcasters will say something that annoys him, and he kind of goes off on them. But while commenters will say like, oh, I can't believe he treated the host that way or stuff like that, when I listen to it, he seems like a stern teacher or like grandfather who's going to force you to learn. Jack says, you will hear me. You will see the trees and the forest. I will make you see. So Jack is exceedingly direct. He is like a bull in a china shop in a way, but I love the guy, and he is the biggest fish in this pond. Dr. Alexis Cowan, she's She is a graduate from, she's a PhD researcher. She graduated from the Rubinowitz Metabolic Lab, which is the most prestigious metabolic lab in the world. That's her background. She was researching a completely different topic and thought her career was going in a particular direction. And Jack Kruse did a 6-hour 2-part podcast with Dr. Andrew Huberman, who's a Stanford University professor. And another person I really like. I've always loved Andrew Huberman. So anyway, Jack does this 6-hour podcast with Huberman, and it's like Jack is educating him. It's like Jack's the teacher and Huberman's the student, is the way that kind of plays out. And I thought Huberman did a great job of being very humble throughout that podcast. But, Jack's intense. And he basically lays out his story for light. And so anyway, Alexis Cowan comes along, this Princeton PhD researcher from the Rubinowitz lab. She watches that 6-hour podcast, and that podcast has changed the entire course of her life. Her research now is 100% focused on light. It's crazy. And another thing I would say that's really good about Alexis, because she said she went down the light rabbit hole, and she didn't intend to. She just happened to watch that podcast, and happening to watch that podcast has changed her entire life's direction. But one of the things she does really well is she explains some of these concepts in a way that's very palatable for people. And the place to find her, more palatable and easier to digest maybe than Jack. And so the place to go for her is Instagram, is where to find Alexis Cowan. And then Max Ghislaine is also, he's an MD. And I think he's like a family GP. And I think he at some point encountered Jack Kruse also and went down the light rabbit hole. So those two people were greatly affected by Jack, and that's how they got on the track that they're on, I believe. So I think that's all I wanted to say there.
Like as Forrest Gump said, that's all I got to say about that.
That's all I got to say. And I ramble all over the place for like 20 minutes. That's it. That's all I got.
Well, no, it's like we said even before, we're opening showing people some doors, and then they can go check it out. But obviously there's something here. There's something here that's worth taking a look at.
Well, I think there's not only something here. If Jack is right, and I suspect he is, he writes all the time light, and then the greater than symbol, food. And the notion is that, our society puts so much emphasis on diet, right? You got to eat a good diet. And what is a good diet? And some people are vegans, and some are carnivores, and some are keto, and some are, whatever. It's all over the place. And Jack's point is, if you get light right, what you eat does not really matter. And so that's some of the people Jack beats up on really hard are these, the researchers and clinicians and stuff that talk a lot about food and say it's all about food. And according to Jack, that's nonsense. It's all about light. And if you get light correctly, food doesn't matter so much.
Wow. Yeah. Well,
and
it's a fascinating subject, and
it's
going to look more into it. Yeah.
And because I've gone down this rabbit hole so far and listened to so many, different presentations and podcasts from the doctors I've talked about here and others, it's I think this is maybe the most profound discovery of my life is what light is and its importance in relation to achieving a state of good health. I think it's the most important thing. And I've discovered things I thought were real whoppers in the past, but man, nothing like this.
Okay. Well, what do you think? Did we
Yeah,
flesh it out?
it has been a
for
great
good enough
time.
for now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Good enough for now. And keep anything in here you want. Anything silly I said. Don't worry about editing silliness out. If you want to keep whatever you want to keep,
Yeah.
Jason, keep.
No,
Toss out the rest.
Yeah.
And the other thing I might tell the audience is if I've wandered around aimlessly here, it's because this is the first time I've ever done anything like this. Ever.
Yeah, it was great. And
That's very kind. Thank you.
yeah, well, thank you for coming on, and everybody who's been watching and listening. Remember that it is offered as a video too, so you can head on over to awaketheiron.com, and all our videos are there, and as well as the podcasts on whatever podcast player you're watching. You can always give us a call on the Awake the Iron hotline. It's 601-654-IRON, or you can text if you have social anxiety. Just drop a text. It's a question or a comment. That'd be great. And I was excited to have David on because I consider myself someone who knows a little about a lot of things, but David is one of those guys that knows a lot about a lot of things. And so I was excited to have him on. We have such good conversations outside of this that I was like, man, we gotta do one. And this topic, he could probably talk about any topic, but this one was right up there at the top of his current research, right? So it was relevant. Yeah. So, but we'll go ahead and round out the show for now. I appreciate everyone being here.
Jason.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for the kind words. You're too kind, and you remind me of my favorite, one of my favorite sayings, which is, "I know very little, but I suspect a lot."
That applies to me for sure.
And hey, I love you, man. I'll always love our chats, and this has been fabulous, just like all of our chats.
Yeah. So with that, I really appreciate your time, and
Anytime.
Yeah, everybody come back for our next episode, whatever that might be. And in the meantime, be sure to keep your powder dry, and we'll see ya.
Bye, everyone.
Time-lapse cameras were used in a standard first-grade classroom, and several hyperactive children may be noted, especially the boy in the immediate foreground. "90 days after the regular cool white fluorescent tubes were replaced with the new type full-spectrum fluorescent tubes with radiation shields, there was a marked improvement noted, and the extremely hyperactive boy has voluntarily moved up to the front row. He raises his hand for recognition and is now up at the blackboard taking part in classroom activities. Prior to the time that this new lighting was installed, this particular boy had an extreme learning disability problem, but quickly learned to read within 90 days after the new lights were installed. There was further noted a general average improvement in both the behavior and academic achievement of the entire class. There are, however, other factors that must also be considered. The implications of the biological effects of light and radiation, as observed through time-lapse photography, are obvious.